friends, neighbors, anyone who's ever lived under the watchful eye of a homeowners association, pull up a chair, grab a warm drink because I've got a story for you. A story that begins, as so many do, with good intentions. A family visit and ends with an unexpected clash of wills, the chilling rustle of legal papers, and a quiet suburban community holding its breath. This isn't just about rules and regulations, mind you. This is about power, about what happens when a little bit of authority goes to someone's head, and how easily a nice neighborhood can transform into a battleground for basic freedoms. Our story unfolds in a place called the Pristine Pines. Oh, it lived up to its name, all right? Every lawn was a uniform shade of emerald green, every shrub clipped into perfect geometric precision. Mailboxes stood in perfectly aligned rows, identical in every way, a testament to what the developers called harmonious living. It was marketed as luxury, a haven for those seeking peace, order, and predictable tranquility. But if you paid close enough attention, you could feel it. A thin, almost invisible hum of tension, a quiet anxiety that buzzed beneath the perfectly raked gravel paths and the perpetually clean streets. This hum, my friends, was the sound of the Pristine Pines Homeowners Association, or simply the HOA. And at the very top of that particular pyramid of power sat a man named Arthur Finch. Arthur Finch was 50 years old, but carried himself with the stiff, unyielding posture of a man who believed he was born to command. He'd retired a few years back as the CEO of a mid-sized manufacturing company, a man who prided himself on efficiency, on adherence to protocol, on eliminating waste, human or otherwise. When he moved to Pristine Pines, he didn't see a community to relax in. He saw a new project, an entire residential complex ripe for optimization, for the application of his unique brand of rigid order. He dressed impeccably, even on weekends, always in pressed chinos and crisp polo shirts, his silver hair perfectly combed. His smile rarely reached his eyes, which were a piercing, almost clinical blue, constantly scanning for imperfections. He wasn't loud, not overtly tyrannical, but his quiet disapproval felt heavier than any shout. He ruled the HOA board with an iron fist, his fellow members either too intimidated or too apathetic to challenge his meticulous, by-the-book fanaticism. He believed, truly believed, that his draconian enforcement of every single bylaw, no matter how obscure or trivial, was not just maintaining property values, but elevating the very standard of living for everyone in Pristine Pines. He saw himself as a visionary, a protector of their collective investment. Any dissent was not just a challenge to the rules, but a personal insult to his superior judgment. Arthur had also invested heavily in what he called community oversight. That meant a network of discrete cameras at every entrance and common area, and a few strategically placed on his own property that, curiously, seemed to have a wide view of his neighbors' activities. And then there were his eyes and ears, a few elderly residents desperate for his approval who were more than happy to report on their neighbors' perceived transgressions. Now, into this carefully constructed, highly regulated world stepped our protagonist, Eleanor Vance. Eleanor was in her mid-30s, sharp, independent, and a highly successful data analyst for a major tech firm in a bustling city. Her life was about logic, about problem-solving, about navigating complex systems with a calm, analytical mind. She was practical, a bit direct, but possessed a deep, almost fierce loyalty to her family. Her own city apartment building had an HOA, but it was benign, focused on maintenance and amenities, not micromanaging the placement of potted plants. The idea of fines for excessive child laughter, a literal fine Arthur Finch had once proposed, though thankfully voted down, was utterly alien to her. Eleanor was visiting her mother, Evelyn Vance. Evelyn was in her late 70s, a sweet, gentle woman, a little frail now, with soft, kind eyes that often held a hint of worry. She'd moved to Pristine Pines after her husband passed, seeking exactly the kind of peace and quiet the brochures promised. Evelyn had always tried to be a good resident, meticulous about her own lawn, ensuring her recycling bin was out on the correct day, terrified of drawing the HOA's attention. She wilted under confrontation, her anxiety spiking at the mere thought of a formal letter from the HOA. She saw Arthur Finch as a formidable, unchallengeable authority figure, and she lived in quiet fear of him. Eleanor arrived on a warm Tuesday afternoon, her sleek electric car looking almost out of place amidst the uniformity of Grandview's carefully curved driveways. The air was thick with the scent of freshly cut grass and blooming azaleas. It was beautiful, undeniably. But as she drove through the meticulously manicured streets, a faint unease settled over her. Everything was too perfect, too controlled. "Oh, darling, you're here!" Evelyn exclaimed, rushing out to embrace her daughter, her relief palpable. "I was just tidying the porch, just in case." The just in case hung in the air, unspoken but understood. In case Arthur Finch was looking. Eleanor smiled, but her analytical brain was already cataloging. A small, decorative wind chime on Evelyn's porch. Charming, but was it a violation? A tiny ceramic gnome tucked amongst the petunias? Was that unapproved outdoor decor? The very thought was absurd, yet the underlying tension was real. The reason for Eleanor's extended visit wasn't just a holiday. Evelyn had been struggling with a persistent cough and some mobility issues. Eleanor had come to help her mother transition to a more comfortable living arrangement, potentially installing a temporary ramp at the front door to assist her. It was a simple, practical necessity. The very next morning, Eleanor got to work. She decided against a full, permanent ramp, opting instead for a sturdy, portable one that could be easily deployed when Evelyn needed to go out and then stored discreetly. To make the entrance a little more accessible and pleasant for her mother during her recovery, Eleanor also decided to add a small, vibrant planter box on either side of the front steps, filled with bright, cheerful marigolds. They weren't attached to the house, just freestanding. Simple, beautiful, and functional. Or so she thought. That afternoon, as Eleanor was admiring her handiwork, a sleek, custom golf cart, looking more like a miniature armored vehicle, glided silently to a halt on the street outside Evelyn's house. At the wheel, sunglasses firmly in place, was Arthur Finch. He didn't get out immediately. He simply sat there, observing. Eleanor felt a prickle of annoyance. It was like being under a microscope. Finally, he turned off the engine, removed his sunglasses with a deliberate, almost theatrical slowness, and fixed his clinical gaze on Eleanor. "Miss Vance, I presume?" His voice was smooth, almost oily, yet carried an undertone of unyielding authority. "Eleanor Vance," she corrected, stepping off the porch, a polite but firm smile on her face. "And you must be Mr. Finch. My mother has mentioned you." The last part was delivered with just a hint of irony, which Arthur seemed to entirely miss. "Indeed, and I must say, Miss Vance, I'm rather surprised. I was under the impression that Mrs. Vance was aware of the aesthetic covenants of pristine pines." His gaze flickered to the marigold planters, then to the subtle, almost invisible seam where the temporary ramp would sit. Eleanor felt her jaw tighten. "These are just temporary planters, Mr. Finch, to brighten the entrance for my mother, and the ramp is for her mobility. She's recovering." Arthur's thin lips barely twitched. "Temporary or not, Miss Vance, all external modifications, even decorative, must undergo architectural review and approval. And a ramp, however temporary, fundamentally alters the approved facade. This is a clear violation of Article 4, Section B, Subsection 3 of our bylaws." He pulled a small, laminated card from his shirt pocket, as if ready to provide a direct quote. Eleanor stared at him, incredulous. "You're serious? Flower pots? A temporary mobility aid? Maintaining the consistent aesthetic of pristine pines is paramount, Miss Vance. It protects all our property values." His voice was devoid of warmth, of empathy. "Consider this your initial verbal warning. I expect these items to be removed by 5 p.m. today. Failure to comply will result in a formal notice of violation and accruing fines as per our schedule." He put his sunglasses back on, started the golf cart, and drove away, leaving Eleanor fuming on the perfectly manicured lawn. Evelyn, who had been watching from inside, wrung her hands. "Oh, Eleanor, I knew it. I just knew he'd say something. He's always so particular." Eleanor, however, was not Evelyn. Her annoyance quickly morphed into a cold, analytical resolve. This wasn't just about flower pots. It was about an abuse of power. She spent the next hour reading through Evelyn's HOA bylaws, a document as dense and convoluted as any legal brief. She found Article 4, Section B, Subsection 3. It indeed mentioned external modifications needing approval, but it spoke of permanent structures, additions, significant landscaping changes. It said nothing about temporary planters or mobility aids for an elderly resident. Arthur Finch wasn't just enforcing rules. He was interpreting them with a punitive bias. She decided to play by his rules, for now. She politely emailed the HOA office, attaching photos of the planters and the proposed ramp placement, requesting an immediate architectural review for necessary temporary accommodations. She quoted the section of the bylaws she believed supported her case. She expected a reasonable discussion. What she received the next morning was a formal, harshly worded letter from the HOA, signed, of course, by Arthur Finch. It stated her unauthorized alterations were already accruing fines of $100 per day, effective from 5 p.m. the previous day. It demanded immediate removal and warned that further non-compliance would result in additional penalties and potential legal action. There was no mention of her email, no offer of discussion, no acknowledgement of Evelyn's health needs. It was a direct, unapologetic power play. This infuriated Eleanor. She wasn't just a data analyst, she was a meticulous documenter. From that moment on, every interaction, every email, every conversation, every notice from the HOA was meticulously logged, dated, and stored. She started a dedicated folder on her laptop. Pristine Pines HOA, case file. Arthur Finch, sensing an easy victory, doubled down. He directed Reggie Thorne, the community's private security officer, the same Reggie from our previous story, eager to please his new, stricter boss, to conduct daily inspections of Evelyn's property. Reggie, emboldened, began to hover, often parking his golf cart directly across the street from Evelyn's house, making it clear he was watching. Fines started piling up for new, increasingly ridiculous violations. A faint oil stain barely visible on the driveway, improperly stored garden tools, a small trowel left on the porch railing for half an hour, even a fine for excessive glare from Eleanor's polished car parked in the driveway. Evelyn grew more anxious, retreating into herself, apologetically urging Eleanor to just pay the fines. But Eleanor refused. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about principle. Eleanor began to subtly gather information. She talked to other residents, casually at first. She discovered a pattern. Arthur Finch had a history of targeting new residents or those he perceived as weak links, asserting dominance. Several people recounted similar stories of baffling fines and relentless pressure. One elderly couple had been forced to remove a small, sentimental bird bath that had been in their family for decades, simply because Finch decided it detracted from the uniform aesthetic. Others whispered about Finch using the HOA's legal budget to threaten non-compliant residents into submission. He was known to have lawyers on retainer who would send intimidating letters at the slightest provocation. The breaking point came when Arthur Finch, citing an obscure visitor parking regulation, which Eleanor later found was typically only enforced for long-term guests exceeding a week, and Eleanor had only been there for 4 days, had Evelyn's small, perfectly functional mobility scooter, which Evelyn used to access the community clubhouse, towed from her own driveway in the middle of the night. It wasn't just an inconvenience. It was an act of pure malice, designed to cripple Evelyn's already limited independence and to financially burden her further with towing and impound fees. Evelyn was devastated, reduced to tears, feeling trapped in her own home. Eleanor's analytical mind snapped into attack mode. This wasn't just a local HOA dispute anymore. This was harassment. This was a deliberate attempt to deprive an elderly woman of her property and her freedom of movement within her own community. And it had crossed into dangerous territory. She spent the entire night consolidating her case file, photos of the pristine porch before the planters and ramp, photos of the planters, the initial email to the HOA, every formal notice and fine, the video Evelyn had inadvertently captured on her phone of Reggie Thorne, aggressively circling their house, the towing invoice for the scooter. She even had a recording, done legally with clear notification to Arthur Finch, during a phone call she initiated, where he had been exceptionally condescending and threatening, where he explicitly stated his intention to make an example of non-compliant residents. The next morning, Eleanor didn't call the HOA. She didn't call a local lawyer. She knew this went beyond standard real estate law. She thought back to the case of the mall cop, Reggie's initial foray into power. Though Eleanor didn't know the exact details, she knew it involved federal intervention due to gross overreach, and connected the dots. She meticulously compiled her evidence into a pristine, indexed digital document. Then, she made a very specific phone call to a contact she knew from her own professional network, a friend who worked in regulatory compliance, who then directed her to a specific department within a federal agency that dealt with civil rights and consumer protection violations, particularly when a pattern of harassment or discrimination could be established by an entity wielding quasi-governmental authority like an HOA. The process was slow at first, quiet, methodical. Eleanor provided her initial documentation. The federal agency, recognizing the potential for a larger pattern, dispatched a few discreet agents. They didn't wear badges on their belts. They wore quiet suits and blended into the suburban landscape. They started by reviewing the documents Eleanor provided, cross-referencing with public records of the Pristine Pines HOA, its financial dealings, and its history of resident complaints. Arthur Finch, meanwhile, remained utterly oblivious. He was too busy reveling in his perceived victory over the Millers. He sent them another fine, this time for unauthorized emotional distress inflicted upon HOA management, a charge so absurd it was almost comical, if it weren't so indicative of his escalating delusion of grandeur. He saw himself as untouchable, the ultimate authority within his perfect little kingdom. He believed Eleanor Vance was just another city slicker who would eventually give up and go home, abandoning her mother to his mercy. The whispers began subtly within Pristine Pines. Residents saw unfamiliar cars asking quiet questions. Neighbors who had once been tight-lipped suddenly found courage, emboldened by the scent of external intervention. Stories of Arthur's abuses, previously confined to hushed conversations, began to emerge into the light. The bird bath incident, the forced color changes, the aggressive threats, it all started to form a damning tapestry of his unchecked power. Then came the Tuesday morning that Arthur Finch would never forget. He was in his home office, reviewing his violation log, perhaps planning his next punitive action. He'd just finished a call with the HOA's legal counsel, gloating about how they'd shut down Eleanor Vance. A knock came at his meticulously polished front door. He opened it, expecting a delivery, or perhaps one of his eager informants. Instead, standing on his perfectly manicured lawn were two individuals in dark suits, their expressions unreadable. One held up a small leather wallet, revealing a federal badge. "Mr. Arthur Finch, we're from the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We'd like to ask you a few questions regarding the operations of the Pristine Pines Homeowners Association." Arthur Finch's face, usually so composed, went ashen. His clinical blue eyes widened in genuine shock. He stammered, The FBI? This is a private community. This is a local matter." "Mr. Finch," the female agent said calmly, her voice devoid of emotion, "when an entity uses its authority to systematically deprive individuals of their civil rights, to engage in harassment, and to potentially extort residents under the guise of community governance, it becomes a federal matter. We have reason to believe that a pattern of such conduct exists within the Pristine Pines HOA, specifically under your direction." He looked like a man who had been struck by lightning. His meticulously ordered world, his self-created kingdom, was crumbling around him. The case file that Eleanor Vance had diligently built, combined with the brave testimonies of other residents, had been enough. Arthur Finch, the self-appointed emperor of Pristine Pines, was escorted away, his perfectly pressed clothes suddenly looking rumpled, his rigid posture gone. The charges were numerous, ranging from civil rights violations to potential fraud and harassment, all stemming from his systematic abuse of power. His power trip had indeed materialized, but it had led him directly into the cold, unyielding embrace of federal law enforcement.
Come on.
For Evelyn Vance, the immediate relief was immense. Her mobility scooter was returned, the fines rescinded, and the atmosphere in Pristine Pines began to lighten. Eleanor, her mission accomplished, stayed a little longer to ensure the HOA was restructured, its bylaws revised, and an independent oversight committee put in place. The story of Arthur Finch, the tyrannical HOA president who got a federal investigation instead of a continued power trip, became a whispered legend in Pristine Pines. It was a stark reminder that even in the quietest, most outwardly perfect neighborhoods, unchecked authority can breed tyranny. And sometimes, it takes someone like Eleanor Vance, someone who simply came to visit her mom, to expose the rot and bring justice. And that, my friends, is how a simple visit to mom ended with a case file and federal charges. A true testament to the fact that you never truly know what battles are being fought behind those perfectly trimmed hedges.